The tall one spoke first, his voice like gravel, smoothed by river water, low and careful. "Ma'am, I know you don't know us, and I know what it looks like, two strangers riding up at sunset with trouble bleeding all over them. But this boy's dying, and you're the only house for 20 miles that had smoke coming from the chimney." Margaret looked at the young man across the saddle, his breathing shallow and rapid, his copper skin gone grey at the edges. She'd seen that colour before, on her husband in his final hours, the colour of life deciding whether to stay or go. "Bring him inside," she said, and the words came out rougher than she intended, unused to the shape of invitation. The shorter cowboy, dark-haired with eyes that seemed to catch every movement, every shadow, slid off his horse in one fluid motion. "Name's River," he said, already moving to help ease the wounded boy down. "That's Cole. We're not here to cause you trouble." Cole dismounted, with the same careful control he'd shown in the saddle, and together they carried the boy toward the house. Margaret held the door, and as Cole passed her, she caught the scent of leather and sage smoke, sweat and something else, something almost like cedar. He was taller than any man she'd known, had to duck slightly to clear her doorframe, and his hands on the boy were gentle in a way that made her throat tighten. "Put him on the table," she said, sweeping aside the half-finished mending she'd been picking at all evening. "I'll need water boiling and clean cloth. There's a basin by the stove." River moved immediately, like a man used to taking orders, or maybe just used to crisis. Cole stayed with the boy, one large hand resting on the kid's shoulder, murmuring something too low for Margaret to hear. When she came closer with her sewing scissors to cut away the blood-soaked shirt, she saw the wound. A bullet had torn through the boy's side, missing vital organs, but leaving a path of destruction that would kill him just as sure if infection set in. "He needs a doctor," she said. "Nearest doctor's in Redemption Ridge," Cole said, his eyes meeting hers. "They see a native boy with a bullet in him. They'll finish the job or let him die while they ask questions we can't answer." Margaret's jaw tightened. She knew he was right. She'd seen how the town treated anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of deserving. "Then we do it ourselves." She'd helped birth calves and stitch up ranch hands in her married years. She'd cleaned her husband's wounds when he'd been thrown from a horse and cracked his ribs. Her hands knew the work, even if they trembled slightly as she threaded the curved needle. Cole moved to the boy's head, his large hands framing the kid's face with unexpected tenderness. "I need you to hold him," she said. "This is going to hurt." "I've got him," Cole said, and there was a weight to those 3 words that made Margaret believe him. River appeared at her elbow with the boiled water, clean cloth draped over his arm. "Tell me what you need." Udam, and so it began, the 3 of them working in the lamplight, Margaret's hands steady as she cleaned the wound, as she drew the torn flesh together with careful stitches while the boy thrashed, and Cole held him with strength, and River murmured reassurances in a mix of English and what sounded like Spanish. The intimacy of it, the closeness of 3 strangers united in the desperate work of saving a life, felt like stepping into a river she didn't know she'd been thirsting for. When it was done, when the wound was closed and bandaged, and the boy had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Margaret stepped back and realized her hands were shaking. Cole's shirt was blood-stained. River's face was tight with worry, and her kitchen looked like a battlefield. "Thank you," Cole said, and his voice carried something that sounded almost like awe. "You didn't have to help us." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how she must look, hair escaping its pins, face lined with years of sun and sorrow, nothing like the fresh-faced girls in town who still drew men's eyes. "I couldn't let a boy die on my porch." "Still," River said, and his smile was warm, genuine, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Most wouldn't have opened the door." She didn't know what to say to that, so she turned to practical matters. "He'll need watching through the night. Fever will set in. We'll need to keep him cool, get water in him when he wakes." "We'll take turns," Cole said immediately. "You've done enough." But Margaret shook her head. This was her house, and for the first time in 7 years, it felt like something other than a tomb. I'll make coffee. We'll all watch. If you were this woman, living alone for years, would you let two strangers step into your home on a night like this? Would you recognize the moment your life was about to change? Or would it slip past you like so many other sunsets, unremarkable until it was gone? The night stretched long and strange, the three of them taking turns at the boy's bedside, learning each other in the soft way that crisis allows. River talked, his voice a steady stream of stories about growing up in Santa Fe, about learning to track from his grandfather, about the way the desert smelled after rain. Cole mostly listened, but when he did speak, his words carried weight, each one chosen carefully, each one revealing something he seemed reluctant to share. Margaret learned that they'd found the boy 3 days ago, bleeding in a dry creek bed, and that Cole had insisted on saving him even though River had argued it was too dangerous, that whoever shot the kid might still be hunting him. She learned that they were drifters working ranch to ranch, moving before they got comfortable, moving before anyone asked too many questions. "Why help him?" she asked Cole as dawn began to grey the windows. "You didn't know him." Cole's blue eyes, pale as winter sky, held hers. "I watched a lot of men die in the war, men who didn't have to. After a while you start to wonder if saving just one might balance the scales." There was a story there, a wound that went deeper than flesh, and Margaret recognized it because she carried her own, the baby she'd lost in her 32nd year, the one that had taken her ability to have more with it. The way Thomas had looked at her after, like she'd become something broken, something less, the slow death of being invisible to the man who'd promised to love her. "The scales don't balance," she said quietly, "but maybe it's enough to try." Something passed between them then, a recognition, a seeing of each other that felt dangerous in its honesty. River cleared his throat from across the room, and the moment broke, but it didn't disappear. It hung there between them like smoke, like heat, like the first breath before a storm. The boy woke just after dawn, his dark eyes unfocused with pain and fever. Cole was there immediately, offering water, speaking in a low voice that seemed to calm the kid, even though Margaret couldn't understand the words. Some language that wasn't English, wasn't Spanish, something older and more patient. "His name is Running Bear," Cole said, looking up at Margaret. "He says men came to his village, railroad surveyors with guns. They wanted the land along the creek, wanted the families to move. When the elders refused, they started shooting. He ran, and they followed." Margaret's stomach turned cold. She knew about the railroad, about their tactics, about the way they treated anyone who stood between them and their precious steel tracks. "How many men?" "He says 6, River translated, having moved to the boy's other side. "Led by a man named Garrett. Dutch Garrett." The name hit Margaret like a fist. She'd met Dutch Garrett exactly once, when he'd come to her ranch 6 months ago with papers and promises and thinly veiled threats. A thick-necked man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them, who told her that widows who didn't cooperate tended to have unfortunate accidents. "I know him," she said, and both men looked at her sharply. "He wants my land too, for the rail line." Cole's expression went hard, all the gentleness she'd seen him show the boy replaced with something predatory. "Then, you're in danger." "I've been in danger for months," Margaret said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I'm still here." River laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stubborn, I like that." The day unfolded strange and suspended, the three of them existing in the bubble of Margaret's kitchen while the boy slept and healed, while they took turns keeping watch, while the reality of what they'd done settled into their bones. Margaret cooked, something she hadn't done with care in years, making biscuits and gravy, frying bacon, brewing pot after pot of coffee. Cole tended the boy with a patience that seemed infinite, changing bandages, checking for fever, offering water and soft words. River moved between them, restless energy barely contained, checking the windows, watching the horizon like he expected riders to appear at any moment. "You think they'll come looking for him?" Margaret said, not a question. Men like that don't leave loose ends, River said. They'll track him here eventually. Let them, Cole said from the boy's bedside, and his voice carried a threat that made the air feel heavier. We'll be ready. Margaret should have been afraid. Should have asked them to leave, to take the boy and go before trouble found her doorstep. But she'd been alone so long, had been so tired of being afraid, that the prospect of a fight felt almost like relief, like permission to stop being invisible. There's rifles in the barn, she said, and ammunition in the cellar. If they come, we don't go quietly. River's grin was sharp as broken glass. I knew I liked you. The second night fell with the weight of waiting, and Margaret found herself sitting on the porch steps with Cole, while River kept watch over the sleeping boy. The stars spread across the sky like spilled salt, and the air smelled of sage and coming rain. Tell me about your husband, Cole said, and the request was so unexpected that Margaret almost didn't answer. Thomas, she said finally. He was a good man in his way. Built this ranch from nothing, worked himself into an early grave trying to make it prosper. He loved me, I think, but not enough to see me after I couldn't give him children. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. A man who stopped seeing his wife because of something that wasn't her fault, wasn't looking very hard to begin with. The words settled into Margaret's chest like stones into water, creating ripples she couldn't quite control. That's a kind thing to say. It's a true thing, Cole said. Some men don't know what they have until it's gone. Some don't know even then. She turned to look at him in the starlight, this tall stranger who'd ridden into her life carrying a dying boy, who'd shown more gentleness in 2 days than she'd known in 7 years. And you? What do you know about what you have? His smile was small, sad around the edges. I know that I've spent 10 years running from things I couldn't fix. I know that watching you save that boy's life reminded me that not everything has to end in death. I know that sitting here with you feels like the first time I've been still in longer than I can remember. Margaret's breath caught. She was 43 years old, with silver threading through her dark hair, with lines at her eyes, and hands rough from work, with a body that had been dismissed as past its prime by every man in Redemption Ridge. And this man, younger than her by maybe 5 years, was looking at her like she was water in the desert. Cole, she started, but he shook his head. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I see you. That's all. I see you, and what I see is someone worth seeing. The ache in her chest was almost unbearable. Want and fear tangled so tightly she couldn't separate them. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to be seen as anything other than an obstacle or a burden or a woman whose best years were behind her. And here was this quiet, damaged man offering her the simple gift of recognition. She didn't touch him, didn't reach for him, but she let herself look, let herself trace the line of his jaw with her eyes, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself like he was always ready to fight or flee. Let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to be held by those hands that had been so gentle with the wounded boy. I see you too, she said finally, and it felt like the bravest thing she'd said in years. The moment hung between them like a held breath, and then River's voice cut through from inside. Cole, he's asking for you. The spell broke, but it didn't shatter. Cole rose, his hand brushing Margaret's shoulder as he passed, the touch so brief it might have been accidental, but it burned through her dress like a brand. She sat alone on the porch, her heart hammering, feeling more alive than she had in longer than she could remember. Inside, she found Cole and River both bent over the boy, whose fever had broken and whose eyes were clear for the first time. He was speaking rapidly in his own language, his hands moving, and Cole was nodding, his expression grave. "What is it?" Margaret asked. River looked at her, and his usual warmth was replaced with something harder. "He says his people are coming. He managed to signal them before we found him. They'll be here by dawn." Margaret's stomach dropped. "How many?" "3 tribes," Cole said quietly. "The Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute, they've united to protect the sacred grounds along the creek, grounds the railroad wants to destroy." "That's a war," Margaret said. "It's a last stand," River corrected. "And we're standing right in the middle of it." The night became a flurry of preparation. Cole and River moved with military precision, checking weapons, securing the barn, planning fields of fire and fallback positions. Margaret worked beside them, her fear transforming into something sharp and useful, something that felt like purpose. "You should go," Cole said to her as they stacked ammunition in the cellar. "Get to town before the tribes arrive. You don't have to be part of this." "This is my land," Margaret said. "And that boy is in my house. I'm already part of it." "The railroad will use this as an excuse," River said from the doorway. "They'll say the tribes attacked you. Use it to justify bringing in the cavalry. This could get ugly." "It's already ugly," Margaret said. "Has been for months. Maybe it's time to stop pretending otherwise." Cole's hand found hers in the dim cellar light, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. "If we do this, there's no going back. The railroad won't forgive you for siding with us, with them." "Good," Margaret said, and she meant it. "I'm tired of living small, tired of being afraid. If I'm going to die on this land, let it be for something that matters." River laughed, the sound carrying a wild edge. "She's crazier than we are, Cole. I love it." The horizon began to lighten, and with the dawn came the sound of drums. Low and rhythmic, carrying across the prairie like a heartbeat, like the earth itself was waking up. Margaret stood on her porch between Cole and River, watching as the ridgeline came alive with riders. They came in waves, warriors on painted horses. The three tribes united in a sight she'd never expected to see in her lifetime. The Arapaho, with their distinctive headdresses, the Cheyenne with their ceremonial shields, the Ute with their medicine bundles and war paint. They didn't charge, didn't attack. They simply surrounded the ranch, a living wall of defiance, and waited. A single rider broke from the formation, an older man with silver in his long hair and a bearing that spoke of leadership earned through wisdom rather than violence. He rode slowly toward the house, and Cole stepped forward to meet him. They spoke in the same language Cole had used with the boy, a conversation Margaret couldn't follow but could feel in the tension of Cole's shoulders, in the way the elder's eyes moved between her, the house, the horizon. Finally, the elder nodded, and Cole turned back to Margaret. "This is Chief Standing Wolf of the Arapaho. He thanks you for saving his grandson's life. He says the tribes will protect your ranch as their own, but they ask permission to make camp on your land. They know the railroad men will come, and they want to be ready." Margaret looked at the sea of warriors surrounding her home, at the old chief whose grandson she'd stitched back together on her kitchen table, at Cole, whose eyes held both question and hope. She thought about Thomas, about the years of slow suffocation, about the railroad men with their threats and their papers. She thought about being 43 and alone and tired of living half a life. "Tell him yes," she said. "Tell him they're welcome." The relief that washed over Cole's face was like sunrise, and when he translated her words, a sound rose from the gathered tribes, not a war cry, but something deeper, a sound of recognition and gratitude that raised goosebumps on Margaret's arms. Within hours, her ranch had transformed into a war camp. The tribes set up their lodges with practiced efficiency, creating a village that felt both temporary and eternal, like something that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. The women came to Margaret with gifts, beadwork and woven cloth, treating her with a respect she hadn't known in years. The children ran between the lodges, their laughter bright and sharp as creek water. Running Bear was carried out to his family, and Margaret watched his mother weep over him, watched his grandfather hold his face with shaking hands, and felt something in her chest crack open wider. Cole stood beside her, close enough that their arms brushed, and River was on her other side, and together they watched the reunion like it was something sacred. "You know they'll come," River said quietly. "Garrett and his men. probably with the cavalry behind them. I know, Margaret said. Could be a slaughter, Cole added, his voice heavy. Could be, Margaret agreed. Or it could be a stand. Either way, it's honest. Either way, it matters. That night, the camp came alive with firelight and song, and Chief Standing Wolf invited Margaret, Cole, and River to his lodge. They sat in a circle, passing food and stories, and the old chief spoke of the sacred grounds, of the burial sites and Vision Quest locations that the railroad wanted to destroy, of the generations who had found wisdom and peace in those places. The white men see only what they can use, he said through Cole's translation. They do not see the spirits in the land, the ancestors in the stones. They think we fight for dirt and water. We fight for memory, for the right to remember who we are. Margaret understood that in her bones. Hadn't she been fighting the same battle? Trying to hold onto the ranch not because it was profitable, but because it was the last piece of her that hadn't been taken, the last proof that she had existed, that she had mattered. The railroad offers money, she said. They think everything has a price. Some things cannot be bought, the chief said. The love of a child, the loyalty of a friend, the right to sleep where your fathers slept. These things they have no price because they are priceless. Later, walking back to the house under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Margaret found herself flanked by Cole and River again, the three of them moving together like they'd been doing it for years instead of days. What he said in there, River said, about things being priceless, you think that's true? I think it has to be, Margaret said. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Cole stopped walking, and they stopped with him, the three of them standing in the space between the camp's firelight and the house's lamplight, existing in a moment that felt suspended from time. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough. Both of you. Margaret's heart hammered. River went still beside her. I was at Sand Creek, Cole said, and the name hit like a bullet. I was a soldier in the Colorado Cavalry. I was there when we attacked the Cheyenne village, when we killed women and children and called it war. The silence that followed was enormous, heavy with the weight of confession. Margaret knew about Sand Creek, about the massacre that had happened 11 years ago, about the atrocity that even the government had been forced to acknowledge. I tried to stop it, Cole continued, his voice breaking. I fired over their heads, tried to warn them, got a rifle butt to the face for my trouble, woke up after it was over, and all I could see was blood. All I could smell was smoke. I deserted that night, been running ever since, been trying to figure out how to live with what I saw, with what I didn't stop. River breathed out slowly. That's why you saved the boy. That's why I'll keep saving them, Cole said. Everyone I can, until it's enough or until I'm dead, whichever comes first. Margaret stepped closer to him, close enough to see the tears tracking down his weathered face, close enough to smell cedar and shame and desperate honesty. Does the chief know? I told him, Cole said, before I agreed to translate, before I helped bring the tribes here. I told him everything, and he said that a man who tries to stop evil is not the same as a man who commits it, even if he fails. He said that bringing his grandson home alive earned me the right to help protect what I couldn't save before. The courage it must have taken to confess that, to lay himself bare before the very people he'd failed, was staggering. Margaret reached up without thinking and touched his face, her rough palm against his rough cheek, feeling the warmth of him, the realness of him. You're a good man, Cole, she said. A good man who saw something evil and has spent every day since trying to make it right. That's more than most can say. He turned his face into her palm, his eyes closing, and the vulnerability of it made her ache. River moved closer too, his hand finding Cole's shoulder, and they stood there, the three of them holding each other up in the darkness, bound by honesty and shared purpose and something else, something that felt like the beginning of belonging. We should sleep, River said finally. Tomorrow's going to be hell. But none of them moved, not yet, caught in the gravity of this moment, this recognition of each other as people worth standing beside, worth fighting for, worth saving. When they finally went inside, Margaret found herself unable to settle. She moved through the house, checking on supplies, on ammunition, on the boy who was sleeping peacefully in her spare room, his mother sitting vigil beside him. The house felt full in a way it hadn't since Thomas died, full of purpose and presence and the promise of something she couldn't quite name. She found Cole on the porch again, keeping watch, and she sat beside him without asking permission. They didn't speak for a long time, just existed together in the quiet, listening to the drums in the distance, to the horses moving in the camp, to the wind in the sage. "Do you think we'll survive this?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Cole said, "but I think we'll make them remember us either way." Margaret laughed, the sound surprising her. "I've spent 7 years trying to disappear, trying to be small enough that the world would forget to hurt me. Seems fitting that I'd end it by being impossible to ignore." "You were always impossible to ignore," Cole said quietly. "You just forgot how to see yourself." The words landed in her chest like an arrow, true and painful and necessary. She turned to look at him, this man who'd carried his guilt for 11 years, who'd saved a boy because he couldn't save a village, who'd looked at a widow past her prime and seen someone worth seeing. "If we make it through tomorrow," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "if we survive this, I want to learn how to see myself the way you see me." Cole's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers threading together like they'd been made to fit. Deal. The dawn came too soon and too slow all at once. Margaret woke to the sound of horses, dozens of them, and she knew before she looked that the railroad men had arrived. She dressed quickly, strapping on Thomas's gun belt, loading the rifle she'd carried to defend the cattle from wolves, transforming herself into something harder than she'd been yesterday. In the yard, the tribes were already assembled, warriors mounted and ready, but holding position. Chief Standing Wolf sat his horse at the front, and beside him, mounted on horses that Margaret recognized from her own barn, were Cole and River. They'd armed themselves from her collection, and they looked like something out of a story. 2 cowboys standing with an army of tribes against the railroad's advance. Dutch Garrett rode at the head of his men, 15 strong, all armed, all confident. He pulled up short when he saw the assembled tribes, his face going from red to white to red again. Behind his men, she could see the glint of cavalry uniforms, soldiers brought to enforce the railroad's will. "Mrs. Collier," Garrett called out, his voice carrying false friendliness. "Seems you've got yourself in a bad situation. We're here to help." Margaret stepped out onto her porch, rifle in hand, and the morning sun caught her just right, turning her into something fierce and uncompromising. "The only situation I'm in, Mr. Garrett, is defending my land from men who think they can take what isn't theirs." "That's sedition," Garrett said. "That's harboring hostiles. The cavalry is authorized to use force." "These people are not hostile," Margaret called back. "They're protecting sacred ground that the railroad has no right to destroy, and I'm protecting my property from men who've threatened me for months. If anyone's hostile here, it's you." A ripple went through Garrett's men, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The cavalry captain, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, moved his horse forward. "Ma'am, I have orders to clear this area for railroad construction. I don't want anyone to get hurt." "Then don't hurt anyone," River called out, his voice sharp with sarcasm. "Just turn around and ride back to the fort. Tell your superiors that the people here aren't moving." "I can't do that," the captain said, and he sounded miserable about it. Chief Standing Wolf raised his hand, and silence fell like a blanket. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space between them with the weight of generations. Cole translated, his voice clear and steady. "We have tried your courts and been denied justice. We have tried your treaties and watched you break them. We have tried peace and been met with violence. Now we try this. We plant ourselves here, On this ground our ancestors made sacred, beside this woman who showed mercy to our children. If you want to move us, you will have to kill us. And if you do, the world will know, the world will see, and you will carry the shame of it for the rest of your days." The words settled over the assembled men like snow, cold and inescapable. Margaret saw the captain's face working, saw the soldiers behind him shifting uncomfortably. These were young men, farm boys and city kids who joined the cavalry for regular pay and adventure, not for massacring families on their own land. "This is your last warning," Garrett said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Stand down or face the consequences." "No," Margaret said, and the word was simple and absolute. "This is your last warning, Mr. Garrett. Leave my land. Leave these people alone. Find another route for your railroad that doesn't require blood." For a moment, she thought he might do it, might actually turn around and ride away. But then his hand went to his gun, and everything happened at once. Cole's rifle came up so fast, it seemed like magic, his shot taking the gun from Garrett's hand before the railroad man could clear leather. The tribe surged forward, not attacking but surrounding, creating a wall of horses and warriors that made Garrett's 15 men look like children playing at war. The cavalry horses spooked, and the captain fought to control his mount, his face pale with shock. "Stand down!" the captain shouted at his men, who were looking wildly between their officer, Garrett's hired guns, and the sea of tribal warriors who could have killed them all but were choosing not to. "Stand down! No one fires unless I give the order." Garrett was clutching his hand where Cole's bullet had grazed it, his face purple with rage. "You'll hang for this, Collier, all of you." "Maybe," Margaret said, "but we'll hang as people who stood for something. What will you be remembered for, Mr. Garrett? What stories will your grandchildren tell about you?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and damning. Garrett wheeled his horse, jerking the reins so hard the animal's mouth bled, and kicked it into a gallop back toward town. His men followed, some more reluctantly than others, leaving only the cavalry facing the assembled tribes. The captain sat his horse for a long moment, his young face working through calculations that Margaret imagined were more moral than tactical. Finally, he looked at Chief Standing Wolf, at Cole, at Margaret standing on her porch with her rifle and her stubborn refusal to be moved. "I'll report that the situation is under control," he said carefully. "I'll recommend that the railroad survey team find an alternate route. I can't promise they'll listen, but I can promise I won't lead my men back here to kill families protecting their homes." He saluted, crisp and formal, and Margaret found herself saluting back, the gesture coming from somewhere deep and instinctive. The captain turned his men and rode away, leaving only silence and suspended breath behind. And then the camp erupted, not in war cries, but in celebration, in relief so profound it manifested as sound, as movement, as life asserting itself against the threat of death. Warriors whooped and women ululated, and children who'd been hiding in the lodges came running out, and Margaret found herself swept up in it, in the sheer impossible joy of having survived, of having stood and not broken. Cole and River were off their horses and pulling her into an embrace that should have felt presumptuous, but instead felt necessary, the three of them holding each other like the only solid thing in a spinning world. Margaret laughed against Cole's chest, felt River's arm tight around her waist, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt held. She felt seen. She felt like someone who mattered. The celebration continued all day and into the night, fires burning bright, food shared freely, stories told and retold, with each retelling growing more elaborate and more true. Margaret sat with the elders, drank the bitter tea they offered, learned the names of the women who'd brought her gifts, held the children who were too young to understand what had almost happened, but old enough to sense the relief in their parents' faces. Cole was adopted into the Cheyenne tribe in a ceremony that made him weep openly. River was given a medicine bundle by a Ute shaman who said his spirit had always belonged with the people, and Margaret was honored with a new name. Standing Heart, they called her. the woman whose heart stood firm when everything else wanted to fall. Later, much later, when the fires had burned low and most of the camp had settled into sleep, Margaret found herself back on her porch with Cole and River flanking her again. They'd fallen into this formation so naturally that it felt choreographed. 3 people who'd learned to move as one in the space of a handful of days. "They'll come back," River said quietly. "Maybe not the cavalry, but the railroad. Men like Garrett don't give up." "Let them come," Margaret said. "We'll be ready." We," Cole repeated, and the word sounded like a question and an answer all at once. Margaret looked at him, at River, at these 2 men who'd ridden into her life carrying death and delivered something that looked an awful lot like resurrection. "If you'll stay, if you'll help me defend this place. I know I'm just a widow with more stubborn than sense, with a ranch that barely turns a profit and enemies lining up to take it. But I'm asking anyway. Will you stay?" River's laugh was soft, affectionate. "You're not just anything, Standing Heart. And yes, I'll stay. Someone needs to keep you 2 out of trouble." Cole didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with the same gentleness he'd shown the wounded boy, and he raised it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was chaste, respectful, but it carried the weight of promise, of possibility, of a future that neither of them had dared to imagine a week ago. "I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you'll have me." The ache in Margaret's chest was exquisite, painful in the way that thawing always is, that returning to life after long dormancy requires. She was 43 years old, widowed and dismissed, and written off by everyone who'd ever known her. And here were these 2 men, one who barely spoke and one who never stopped, offering her something she'd thought was lost forever: partnership, purpose, the possibility of being chosen rather than endured. "I need to tell you both something," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not young anymore. I can't give anyone children. The town considers me scandalous just for existing. If you stay here with me, you'll be marked by it. The railroad will come for all of us. It won't be easy or safe or respectable. Good thing we've never been much for respectability," River said. "And I've seen enough death to know that safety is an illusion," Cole added. "I'd rather live 1 real year than 50 false ones." Margaret's eyes burned with tears she'd refused to shed for so long. They felt foreign, felt like relief. "Then stay, both of you. Help me turn this ranch into something worth defending. Help me prove that people like us, people the world wants to forget, still matter." "We already proved that today," River said, his hand finding her other hand, so she sat between them connected, anchored by their touch. "But I'm happy to keep proving it for as long as it takes." They sat there as the stars wheeled overhead, 3 people who'd found each other in the chaos, who'd chosen to stand together against forces that wanted to erase them. The camp breathed around them, the horses shifted in their sleep, and somewhere in the darkness a night bird called out, its cry both lonely and hopeful. The days that followed developed a rhythm. The tribes remained camped on Margaret's land, working alongside her to fortify the ranch, to plant crops, to dig wells. Cole proved to be a natural leader, his military training combining with his newfound purpose to create something powerful. River was everywhere at once, charming the children, helping the women with their work, scouting the perimeter with the warriors. And Margaret, Standing Heart, found herself at the center of it all. The tribal women taught her their ways of preserving food, of making medicine, of seeing the land as something alive rather than something to be conquered. She taught them in turn, shared her knowledge of raising cattle, of managing water rights, of the legal systems that governed this new world they all had to navigate. She also found herself navigating something else, something more complicated and more thrilling. The growing attraction between herself, Cole, and River. It manifested in small ways at first. Cole's hand lingering on her waist as he helped her down from a wagon. River's eyes following her across the yard, appreciation clear in his gaze. The way both of them seemed to find excuses to be near her, to touch her in passing, to seek her opinion on matters both important and trivial. She was not naive. She understood what was happening, understood that these two men, so different from each other, both wanted her in ways that went beyond companionship. And the scandalous truth was that she wanted them too. Wanted Cole's quiet strength, his gentleness that hid steel beneath. Wanted River's warmth, his easy affection, his ability to make her laugh when everything felt too heavy. One evening, about 2 weeks after the standoff with the railroad, Margaret was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when Cole found her. He'd been riding fence lines all day, checking for signs of railroad scouts, and he looked tired but content in a way she'd never seen him before. "The mare's close," she said, running her hand along the animal's distended belly. "Could be tonight." Cole moved to the horse's head, speaking to her in that low, gentle voice he used with frightened things, and Margaret watched his hands on the mare's neck, strong and sure and tender all at once. When he looked up and caught her watching, something in his expression shifted. "Margaret," he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. "I need to ask you something." Her heart hammered. "Ask! Do you feel it too, this thing between us, between all three of us?" She could have pretended not to understand, could have deflected or denied or made it easy for both of them to step back from this precipice, but she'd spent too many years being invisible, being safe, being less than she was. "Yes," she said simply, "I feel it." Cole crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and then his hands were framing her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, his blue eyes searching hers for permission or maybe for proof that this was real. "I'm not young, I'm not whole. I'm haunted by things I can't undo, but I've never wanted anything the way I want this. Want you, want to wake up every morning and see you, want to spend my days making you smile, want to protect what we're building here." Margaret's breath caught. "I'm older than you. I'm barren. I'm—" "Perfect," Cole interrupted. "You're absolutely perfect. And age doesn't mean a damn thing when someone makes you feel alive for the first time in a decade." She kissed him, or he kissed her. It didn't matter who moved first because they met in the middle, and his mouth on hers was gentle and hungry all at once, tasting like coffee and promise. His hands slid into her hair, loosening the pins that held it back, and she let herself be undone by this patient, damaged man who saw her as something worth cherishing. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, River was standing in the barn doorway, and the expression on his face was complex, layered with desire and uncertainty and something almost like relief. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. "Or you could stay," Margaret heard herself say. "Both of you." And the words hung in the air between them, shocking in their honesty, in their invitation. River's eyes widened, and Cole's hands tightened in her hair, and Margaret felt reckless and powerful, and more herself than she'd been in longer than she could remember. "Margaret," River said, his voice rough, "are you sure? We're not asking you to choose between us. We're not asking you for anything you don't want to give." "I know," she said, "but what if I want to give it anyway? What if I'm tired of living by rules that were made to keep women like me small and grateful for scraps? What if I want both of you, and I don't care if it's scandalous or wrong or impossible?" Cole turned her to face him fully, his eyes fierce. "Then you have us. Both of us, for as long as you want us." River moved closer, his hand finding her waist, his body warm along her side. "We'd share you, protect you, worship you the way you deserve. If that's what you want." What she wanted was to feel alive. What she wanted was to stop being afraid of wanting. What she wanted was these two men who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and hadn't looked away. "Yes," she whispered. "That's what I want." The kiss that followed involved all three of them, a tangle of lips and hands and breathless laughter, standing in the barn with hay dust in the air and a mare about to give birth in the stall behind them. It was absurd and perfect, and so far removed from the lonely life Margaret had been living that it felt like dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. It was real as the calluses on her hands, as real as the scars on Cole's soul, as real as River's quick smile. They didn't take it further that night. The mare did indeed foal, a filly with unsteady legs and liquid eyes, and the three of them stayed up together, delivering her, cleaning her, watching her take her first wobbling steps. Watching life assert itself in the face of all the death that threatened constantly felt symbolic somehow, felt like proof that new things could be born even in difficult circumstances, even when the odds seemed impossible. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in ways both public and private. In public, they worked as a unit, managing the ranch and the tribal camp with increasing efficiency. In private, they learned each other. Cole's preference for quiet mornings and the way he relaxed when Margaret read aloud from the books Thomas had collected. River's restlessness that settled only when he was moving, working, creating something with his hands. They learned Margaret too. Learned that she liked her coffee black and strong, that she hummed while she cooked, that she had nightmares about the baby she'd lost, and woke sometimes crying for a child who'd never drawn breath. They held her through those nights, took turns keeping watch over her sleep, made her feel safe in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The physical intimacy between them grew gradually, built on trust and genuine affection rather than urgency. A hand held while walking, Cole's arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset, River pulling her into his lap by the fire and pressing kisses to her temple while she leaned against him. The night Cole carefully, reverently, undid the buttons of her dress and kissed every scar, every mark, every piece of her that she'd been taught to hide or be ashamed of. They never pushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. And because they didn't push, she found herself offering freely, finding courage in their patience, finding desire in their obvious want of her. The night the three of them finally came together completely, it was autumn, the air crisp with the promise of winter, the camp preparing for the cold months ahead. They'd spent the day working hard, and Margaret's muscles ached pleasantly as she washed up for dinner. When she came into the bedroom she shared with no one, she found both men waiting for her, their faces open and hopeful and nervous. "We want to ask you something," River said, "and you can say no. No pressure, no expectations." Margaret's heart raced. "Ask!" Cole stepped forward, taking her hand. "Will you let us love you? Completely? All of you? Will you trust us with that?" She looked at them, these two men who'd become her partners in every sense of the word. Cole with his steady strength and his haunted eyes, River with his warmth and his protective streak. Both of them looking at her like she was precious, like she was desired, like she was everything they'd been searching for. "Yes," she said, and the word was both surrender and victory. What followed was tender and passionate, careful and wild. Three people learning the language of each other's bodies, finding rhythms that worked, discovering that pleasure could be shared rather than competed for. They were patient with her hesitations, celebrated her boldness, showed her that her body was not a source of shame, but a source of joy. Cole's hands on her skin, River's mouth on hers, the three of them tangled together in a way that should have felt awkward, but instead felt inevitable. The gasps and whispers, the laughter when someone's elbow connected awkwardly with someone's ribs, the breathless moments of perfect connection when they all three moved as one. Margaret discovered that she could still feel desire, still feel beautiful, still feel young in all the ways that mattered. That age was irrelevant when passion was present, that her scars were not reasons for shame, but evidence of survival. That being loved by two men who genuinely wanted her was not greed, but abundance. After, they lay together in her bed, limbs intertwined, hearts still racing. Margaret's head on Cole's chest, River's arm around her waist, the three of them breathing in sync. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" River asked. "For seeing me, for wanting me, for reminding me that I'm still alive." Cole's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "You reminded us first that standing for something matters, that broken things can still be useful, that it's never too late to choose a different path." They fell asleep that way, three people who'd found each other in chaos and built something like family, like home, like hope. The railroad did come back, as they'd known it would. But when they came, they found not a vulnerable widow, but a fortified ranch defended by 3 tribes and 2 cowboys who'd learned to shoot before they could read. They found a community that had unified around a principle, around the idea that some things were worth defending, even when the cost was high. The legal battles that followed were long and complicated. Margaret, with River's help, found lawyers who believed in their cause. Cole used his knowledge of military law to argue that the tribes had rights under existing treaties. The newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly Margaret Collier, Standing Heart, the widow who'd stood against the railroad, became famous. Some called her a hero. Some called her a traitor. Margaret didn't care about either designation. She cared about the children playing safely in the camp. She cared about the sacred grounds that remained untouched. She cared about waking up between 2 men who loved her, who chose her every day, who made her feel like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The winter was hard, but they survived it together. The tribes remained camped on her land, and together they built permanent structures, created systems for shared governance, developed a community that mixed the old ways and the new in something unique and powerful. Spring came with news that the railroad had chosen a different route, that public pressure and legal challenges had made destroying the sacred grounds too costly. It felt like victory, though Margaret knew it was only one battle in a much longer war. But it was their battle, won by people who refused to be invisible, who stood together when standing alone would have been easier, and that meant something. That mattered. On a warm evening in late spring, Margaret stood on her porch, looking out at the ranch, at the lodges and the corrals and the gardens that bloomed with vegetables from seeds the tribal women had shared. Cole was fixing a fence line, his movements economical and sure. River was teaching some of the children to rope cattle, his laughter carrying across the distance. She was 44 years old, living in a way that would scandalize everyone she'd grown up with, sharing her life and her bed with 2 men in a relationship that had no name in the world she'd been raised to navigate. She was partnered with native tribes in a region where that alone could get her killed. She was fighting forces that had infinite money and power while she had only stubbornness and principle. And she had never been happier. Chief Standing Wolf approached, moving with the careful dignity of age, and she offered him the chair beside hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "Your name suits you," he said finally. "Standing Heart, a heart that stands when everything else falls." "I had good teachers," Margaret said, "and you will teach others. Already the young women watch you, see how you live, see that a woman can be strong without being hard, can be loving without being weak. That is a powerful lesson." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm just trying to survive, to build something that lasts." "That is what we all do," the chief said. "Some of us simply do it with more courage than others. Your courage will ripple out beyond this ranch, beyond this moment. People will tell stories about Standing Heart, the woman who faced the railroad and won, the woman who loved without fear, the woman who built a home where all were welcome." "I hope they make me sound braver than I feel," Margaret said. The chief smiled. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more than fear. You have made that decision every day since we arrived. That is the definition of bravery." As the stars began to appear, Cole and River joined them on the porch, settling on either side of Margaret in their accustomed places. The chief excused himself, leaving the 3 of them to the night and each other. "What were you thinking about?" Cole asked, his hand finding hers. Margaret considered the question, looking out at the life they'd built together, at the impossible, improbable, beautiful thing they'd created from desperation and hope and stubborn refusal to accept the world as it was. "I was thinking about second chances," she said finally, "about how I thought my life was over, and then you 2 rode up carrying a dying boy, and everything changed. I was thinking about how grateful I am that I opened my door instead of turning you away." How grateful I am that I chose to stand instead of hide. River's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. We're grateful too, for your courage, for your kindness, for you. They sat together as the night deepened, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built something worth defending, who'd learned that love could look different from what they'd been taught and still be real, still be true, still be worth everything. In the distance, the drums began, low and steady, the heartbeat of a community that had survived against the odds. Margaret closed her eyes and let the rhythm wash over her, let herself feel the warmth of coal on one side and river on the other. Let herself believe that this moment, this life, this impossible, beautiful thing they'd created would last. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The railroad would find other ways to attack. The government would pass new laws designed to separate families and destroy communities. The world would continue to tell them that what they had built was wrong, was impossible, was doomed. But tonight, Standing Heart sat between her cowboys, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her, protected by warriors who'd learned to trust again, and she felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt hope. If this story touched your heart, remember that some of the best journeys begin when we open our doors to strangers, when we choose courage over comfort, when we believe that we're worthy of love, no matter what the world has told us. There are always more stories waiting under these western skies, more hearts learning to stand, more second chances being born from impossible circumstances. May you find your own courage when you need it most.